Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the California Consultation Series hosted by Circular Action Alliance, or CAA. My name is Frances Oni, and I will be moderating today's webinar. First, let's review today's agenda. Dave, we can go to the agenda, please. We will introduce our panelists, then we will give an overview of CAA and SB 54. Next, we'll have a presentation on cost coverage principles, eligible cost categories, the application process, and fundable project examples, followed by a question and answer period. We'll finish off today's webinar by reviewing important next steps. And then next slide, please. With that, let's meet today's panelists. Emily Coven is CAA's California Executive Director. Igor Chugal is Director of Strategic Projects and Program Planning. Susan Robinson is a Technical Advisor. Dave Youssef is Program and Policy Advisor. And Francis Bayou is Recycling Operations Manager. Next slide, please. I want to highlight a few important reminders. Today's presentation is intended for informational purposes only. CAA is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice. If you need legal guidance, please consult with your own counsel. Next slide. We want to underscore our commitment to compliance with federal and state antitrust laws. As participants, we need to avoid discussions around pricing, market allocation, or other topics that could create even the appearance of anti-competitive behavior. Next slide. A few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and the slide deck will be available on CAA's California Consultation webpage. After today's webinar, you'll also receive a link to a questionnaire. We encourage you to complete it within 30 days, as your input is essential in shaping a practical and effective program plan. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of this webinar. All participants will remain muted throughout this session. CAA provides updates on the program plan development at the Producer Responsibility Advisory Board meetings, which anyone can attend by registering on CalRecycle's website. Next slide. We encourage you to register and attend the remainder of CAA's California Consultation Series webinars. You can find the link to register by clicking the link that will be added to the chat. Now I would like to hand it over to Emily Coven, CAA's California Executive Director. Emily.
Thank you, Francis. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of CAA for those of you for whom this is your first time seeing or hearing from CAA. Just want to make sure you understand who we are, kind of what we do. And if you attended our first webinar or plan to attend the future ones, I apologize because you'll have to hear me say this over and over and over again. I'll try to make it unique each time. Next slide. So what is CAA? So we are the U.S. Paper and Packaging Producer Responsibility Organization. And so SB 54 sort of says that a pro or, producer responsibility organization has to be, dedicated to implementing the EPR law. It was founded by a bunch of companies, which you can see here on this logo, all, producers of a lot of paper and packaging. CAA, in addition to being the pro in California, is also the pro in Colorado and Oregon, where we have programs up and running, Minnesota and Maryland, and most likely future states to come. So next slide. So you can kind of see where CAA is currently working. So one thing that's really nice about CAA is that we have Oregon and Colorado have gone ahead of us in California. So Oregon actually has a program up and running as we speak. Colorado is not far behind. So we get a lot of that knowledge from those guys. So we're not entirely reinventing the wheel here in California, although the California program does have elements that do not exist in those two states. We have staff. It's a remote company. We have staff all across the country. We also have a fair few staff from Canada, including some you'll hear from today. And that's because Canada was kind of ahead of the US on packaging EPR. So there's a lot of expertise that we've been able to leverage from our colleagues in Canada here at CAA. Next slide. So this is a graphic that we put together to try to explain kind of the concept of what a pro does. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but if you download the slides afterwards, you might want to spend a little bit of time looking at this because we do a whole bunch of different things. We sort of sit at the middle of a whole bunch of different interest holders. So, but I will say this is that currently we're in the consultation process. So you all are participating in that first one sitting at 12 o'clock. We are really trying to get your input, engage with you all. Then we move on to, we are actually currently drafting the big plan that we'll submit to Cal Recycle on June 15th that will reflect everything that we're gathering through this consultation and lots of other community input. We work with producers to manage their compliance and also importantly collect the fees from them. And then we turn around and use those fees to invest in the recycling system, which is a lot of what you're going to be hearing about today. And we also do a bunch of education and outreach. Just at the bottom, we also do the fees that we set and the ways that we work with producers are sort of all meant to push towards packaging design changes. Okay, next slide. One thing I do want to go over quickly, and I will start to sound like a broken record on this if I see you again, is I'm really trying to work on helping to clarify for the California community the difference between CAA and Cal Recycle as regards SB 54. I think it's very easy to find this confusing. I even find it a little confusing. I'm not going to go through all these bullet points, but again, you'll have this after the presentation. But basically, very broad strokes, CAA's job is to plan and to implement the law. And Cal Recycle's job is to develop the regulations and then to have oversight over CAA. So if you have concerns about the regulations, that's a Cal Recycle thing. And if you have concerns about how it's all being implemented, that's a CAA thing. So you may find yourself being like sent back and forth between the two of us, but we're really trying to get that nice and clear for everybody. Next slide. So very broad strokes, SB 54, here's our big three targets. The first two targets, which is reduction of single-use plastic by 25% and recycling 65%, those are on us as the pro. And so, you know, that's really what we have to focus on doing as a producer responsibility organization. And then there's a third target, which is ensuring that 100% of all packaging is recyclable or compostable. That's actually on the producer. So each and every producer has to do that. Not every producer has to reduce by 25%. They just have to do it in aggregate. And these are the goals by 2032. I think as many of you know, there are interim goals in 2027, 2028, and 2030, but this is kind of the end state that we're aiming for. Next slide. So finally, I want to explain a little bit of where some of our challenges are at CAA and why we are specifically seeking your input. If it was very, very straightforward how we go about doing this, we probably wouldn't need to ask a million people a million questions, but we're doing something really hard here in California. And we have a lot of constraints. So we have legal and regulatory constraints. We have time constraints. You know, we have these goals and they're not moved. Those targets aren't moving. And a lot of the things we're trying to do take a lot of time. We have financial constraints. We'll be collecting fees, but they're not infinite. And we're also operating in a great deal of uncertainty. We still don't have final regulations, and yet we have to push forward with our planning. So we're trying to do something really big and complicated and doing it within a lot of constraints. And so my little light bulb there is sort of to represent that we are looking for ideas. And so really what this consultation is about is we want to share with you what we're thinking today, but this is not our end state, right? Our end state needs your input. So afterwards, please, 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 please fill out the questionnaire, send us your ideas, send us your thoughts. It'll be really, really helpful for us to hear from you, what you think of what you hear today, so that we can actually build a plan that reflects the needs of the community. And I think I have one more slide. Just kind of wanted to point out to everybody here today, the importance of California. So California, by the time that we are done with this, California will have the single biggest EPR program for packaging on the planet. So not only are we going to have a big impact, just size and scope wise, but like the eyes of the world right now in EPR on California. Everyone's watching what we're doing. So we have a really amazing opportunity as a state to have an outsized impact. If we succeed here, when we succeed here, it's really going to have ripple effects around the world. So just another final plea for you to participate, send us your thoughts because your thoughts will have impact far beyond the borders of our wonderful state. And with that, I will hand this over to our presenters to talk about covered cost methodology.
Thank you, Emily, for that. Good afternoon, folks, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dave Youssef, and I'm part of the CA's multidisciplinary team leading the development of the covered costs methodology and payment mechanism. I know that's a bit of a handful, so we're also calling it the California's reimbursement framework. Our goal today is to share progress on the work underway, explain how this connects to the program plan that Emily just outlined that we have to prepare and submit, and also hear from you, local jurisdictions, producers, service providers, nonprofit, and other non-government organizations about what's important and relevant to you as we continue developing this framework. In terms of our objectives today, and as it relates to the SB 54 and cost coverage methodology and payment mechanism. So SB 54 to us is very clear on are the requirements under the PRO plan. Requirements CAA as the PRO must establish a process for determining cover costs. This can be found under PRC code 42051.1 G subsection 1. That process is what we refer to as the covered cost methodology, and paired with it a payment mechanism, which is how payments will ultimately be made to local jurisdictions, recycling service providers, and other eligible entities. Together, these two elements form, we think, the foundation of the covered cost and reimbursement system that we're developing right now and will be included in greater detail than what you'll hear today in the program plan. We're actively working on both fronts in terms of on multiple fronts as it relates to developing the methodology and the payment mechanism. So earlier this spring and summer, we launched surveys and interviews with local jurisdictions and recycling service providers to collect the baseline cost information we need to understand what those new and additional costs are. The costs basically that may have arisen since January 1st, 2023 because of SB 54 implementation and what may be new costs or new changes that will take place subsequent to that as well. This data is critical and will let us begin setting sort of the covered cost reimbursement levels and building out payment mechanism. You know, what we're going to focus today is on more on the administrative process of the methodology. What you'll hear about if you're participating in those webinars on the 16th and the 21st are more of the technical items related to collection costs and MRF costs. So one of the key foundations of our approach is that we have to balance local and statewide needs. The reimbursement framework must work for communities of all sizes while also helping California achieve the ambitious recycling and reduction goals in SB 54. So we're designing a system that supports local implementation, but delivers statewide performance improvements. More collection, more recycling, and ultimately less waste. Statute also makes it clear that we must build on and leverage the existing recycling system. So that to us is our starting point. The framework that we're looking to develop is not about replacing what exists, but more so about strengthening and optimizing it. We're also focused on efficiency and effectiveness. The goal is to fund improvements that produce measurable outcomes and to ensure that producer funding delivers value at every level. A key principle here is to avoid duplication or cross-subsidization. So some programs or may already receive other forms of support like CRV payments or um, revenue streams from commodity sales. But we need to ensure that covered cost funding complements rather than overlap those existing mechanisms. Equally important are accuracy and transparency. The funding process must be straightforward and predictable, and the information submitted to CAA must be accurate, verifiable, and consistent across applicants. And finally, everything we're developing will be fully consistent with SB 54 and its regulations. That means funding must directly support statutory objectives. To organize this work, we've divided into 4 coordinated work streams that together we think form the foundation of the covered costs and payment mechanism. So under work stream 1 focuses on the administrative process. That's the methodology itself and how it will function in practice. This includes the eligibility framework, application process, uh, evaluation of applications, reaching agreements, distributing payment, and other intrinsic items like dispute resolution. We'll talk more about this component today, as it serves as the backbone of the reimbursement system. Work streams 2 and 3 deal with cost analysis, which is all about establishing the 2022 baseline for both collection and MERC processing costs. Those analyses are being led by a consulting support team with input directly from local jurisdictions and service providers across the state. These findings and this process will be discussed in greater detail in the upcoming webinars um, as it relates to reimbursement on October 16th and 21st, where we'll go deeper into the models, the assumptions, and how they'll inform the reimbursement process. Workstream 4 looks at system optimization and material strategy, identifying opportunities to make the system more efficient and resilient while preparing for future material additions and performance requirements. So we'll cover this in other cover this further in other consultation sessions, for example, on one like related to end markets. So this slide helps set the context for why this work is so critical. First, we're looking to develop something that it ensures a fair compensation process so that new and additional costs comply with SB4 are reimbursed and not passed on to ratepayers. Second, it preserves existing local contracts. So SB 54 explicitly notes that the reopening of franchise agreements should not be happening. And third, it supports system improvements, allowing service enhancements without rate increases. Ultimately, it's about shared responsibility and sustainable funding for the long term. So this slide summarizes the main categories of costs that may be eligible for reimbursement or funding, broadly defined in the statute. Our role is to determine how new and additional costs within each category are identified, assessed, and funding. So you have your category of collection and processing costs, so that covers collection services, add the addition of new materials, expanding routes or access, improving service for underserviced areas, includes processing, storage, and haulage of materials to receiving facilities like material recovery facilities and transfer stations. Activities like further cleanup of materials to meet market specifications. Infrastructure and system improvements are includes investments to improve sorting efficiency, reduce contamination, expand processing capacity. The examples include, enhancement to sorting lines and the addition of new capital infrastructure support growth and management of materials. We're hoping that this will account, and the methodology itself will account for regional differences such as geographic or market proximity and population densities. The third bucket is education administrative costs, so covers public education and outreach campaigns, contamination reduction initiatives, and administrative activities like reporting, data collection, and waste characterization. So we're envisioning multiple ways that funding could flow to eligible entities. One pathway is application based. I think this will be the primary route for funding for um, it'll be for specific projects like a facility upgrade or new routes or equipment additions and so forth. This will entail an entity submitting an application and it undergoing through a review process by CA and ultimately leading to some sort of funding. And we'll get into what that process looks like. Um, Programmatic funding, such as um, compensation or funding to based on a per household amount for example, promotion and education services. So that would be a preset amount um, per household, per capita. Not yet clear on exactly how it would, what form it will be in. Um, you would be required to provide a basic level of service to meet the funding requirement here. A third option is where CA has initiated or sought to initiate a project where we've identified a statewide priority to, um, address a certain issue or meet certain requirements. Like, for example, um, film and flexibles, where we know that there isn't a high collection and sorting and recovery rate for this material, yet it's a material that we'll need to collect more and recover more and recycle more of. So there might be a need that we identify and look to directly support. Ultimately, we're hoping to develop these with using these pathways, some flexibility in the funding process for different types of projects and activities for small, medium to large size communities, so that everybody has a potential to receive funding. So this outline at a very high level outlines the step-by-step process we're developing for how local jurisdiction and service providers will apply for and receive funding under the covered cost methodology. Um, we'll start with an application submission from a local jurisdiction or recycling service provider or eligible entity requesting reimbursement or funding for an eligible covered cost. So the program plan will include details on eligibility criteria and we'll also develop guidance materials that applicants will use to prepare their submissions. Once the application is received, CAA will evaluate the request against those criteria. That basically means reviewing whether the costs are new and additional, whether they align with SB 54 goals, fall within the eligible cost categories, and meet whatever requirements that are identified in the guidance documents. After review and evaluation, CA will determine the eligible funding amount and um, basically move to the contracting and agreement stage. And we've sort of modeled this on what we've already implemented in Oregon, where a primary funding agreement that's set consistent terms and conditions with project-specific addenda to capture unique details, whether it's for collection expansion, MRF upgrade, or promotion education initiatives. Once those agreements are in place, funding then will be dispersed according to the terms outlined, either as reimbursed after costs are incurred, or in some cases, pre-made payments for eligible entities. I think it's important to note that this structure is still under development. The goal today is to share how we're thinking about the overall process and get feedback from you folk, particularly what elements of the application and approval process are important to you. Ultimately, the program plan will provide the full detail in how these steps will operate once it's finalized. So this slide shows a screenshot of the service provider portal that our team currently is testing, refining, and also utilizing in Oregon. The purpose of this system is to create a centralized digital platform where service providers, local jurisdictions, and CA can all exchange critical information efficiently and consistently. It serves several important functions. First, it's being used to capture material flow data across the recycling system, bringing together information like operational data like scalehouse, ticket data, and material movement records from multiple entities. So this is helping us obviously to track materials throughout the entire recycling supply chain. Second, the platform supports the financial administrative side of the reimbursement process. It's where service providers can submit and other entities submit funding requests, upload documentation like invoicing, and track the status of their claims and funding requests. Third, we think it enables transparency and accountability by standardizing how data is submitted and managed. We can reduce duplication, improve accuracy, and ensure that both CA and applicants have access to consistent information when it comes to covered cost determination and payments. Now while this version of the portal is being used in Oregon, we think we see it as a starting point for what could be adapted for California. Um, we're highlighting it now as part of the process to, you know, not just to demonstrate how the Oregon system works, but get feedback and identify what aspects translate well for California and where California's existing systems might require adjustments to this approach. Talked a little bit about evaluation um, for criteria that we're going to use to evaluate funding applications. So here's what we're looking at when evaluating applications. We're considering three main groupings. So first is, just general information, providing a project snapshot, what's being proposed, what materials are involved, and where it's happening. Cost assessment, is it new and additional? How does it align with the program plan? And so forth. Third uh, criteria or grouping is, as it relates to readiness and agreements. Is this a multi-stakeholder project? Are all partners aligned? Are there permits in place, or um, is it going to be a challenge to get permits in place if it's applicable related to the initiative or project? Um, this is where, developing service agreements and that are clear is a clear requirement. So again, this is criteria that's still being refined. We'll want your feedback on what else we should be considering. Happy to take that now, but obviously as part of the development of the program plan and what we further communicate, you'll see a lot more detail on the actual criteria. So 2022 baseline is the foundation for all future cost assessments. We're analyzing local collection and MERP processing data from across the state, everything from route density to facility throughput to build cost models that reflect regional differences. Um, we think these models will guide future funding decisions and help ensure fairness in how funding and reimbursement is distributed. You'll hear more about this initiative on the two webinars that I mentioned earlier on the 16th and the 21st. In the next two slides, we provide, what are examples of the types of collection and MERP related projects that could be funded. Um, for collection, examples could include expanding the curbside program through the addition of new materials, or um, moving, self-haul depot residents to curbside collection, or upgrading infrastructure or uh, to reduce contamination. For MERP project, they include efficiency upgrades, equipment additions for new materials, operational adjustments to handle or minimize the amount of residue that's being generated in order to provide or produce a more pure bale of materials. Um, you know, these examples are just meant to be illustrative, not exhaustive. Um, we'll be seeking feedback on what else stakeholders see as priorities. We're also hoping to generate feedback from you folks, likely in the new year, on what initiatives and projects you're thinking of implementing, that you may want to get our feedback on whether or not it would meet sort of the objectives of SB54, it would meet the criteria requirement. Um, we're still in the draft regulation stage, but we think it's kind of important to hear from you folks on some more concrete details as what you're thinking as projects that could be eligible. And um, we'd love to hear that. And at the same time, provide you with the feedback that you may be looking for, so that once the program is up and running, then the funding process maybe is a little bit more streamlined. So how payments may be structured. So payments will vary depending on the project type. It could be on a per household rate, on a per ton rate, milestone or project total project cost based. Most payments will be, um, certainly the ones that have already taken place or have already been initiated will be reimbursement based. Um, but there could be prepayment um, based payments. They may be available for um, jurisdictions or entities where, the availability of budget to initiate the project and pay for it may pose some challenges for them. So, for smaller or disadvantaged entities, that's something that may be worthwhile for them, and certainly something that we would look for to initiate, provide some additional flexibility in the entirety of the process. Larger and regional or publicly owned entities, I think, will typically use the reimbursement process. Again, this is still being developed and we'll continue to test different approaches to ensure fairness and efficiency at the end of the day. So this slide focuses on one of the more important um, structural requirements under SB 54, the need for a formal dispute resolution mechanism under the law, and specifically within the pro plan requirement. CA must include a clear, fair, and transparent process to resolve disputes related to reimbursement decisions. This requirement is also reflected in, obviously, in the draft regulation. Now, as with any reimbursement process of this scale, there will inevitably be situations where disagreements arise. For example, where project is deemed ineligible, or partial payment being awarded instead of a full amount or higher amount that's being requested. A difference of opinion on how costs were calculated or allocated, or even questions of how a project aligns with SB 54 goals and performance standards. We need to make sure that there's a structured pathway to address these issues, um, I think, in a consistent and timely manner. Principles guiding our dispute resolution process straightforward, and we've kind of outlined a little bit of them earlier. Fairness and transparency, so all parties understand how disputes are handled and what documentation is required. Clarity and structure, the process will outline clear steps and timelines from initial review through potential mediation or arbitration. Trust and collaboration, this process should reinforce confidence that disagreements can be resolved objectively and respectfully. We're also conscious that this is a shared responsibility model. CA is not taking over management of local systems or contracts. Instead, we're hoping to build on California's existing infrastructure and systems. So that means we need a dispute resolution process or dispute resolution approach that supports partnership and not conflict, one that keeps producers, local jurisdictions, and service providers ultimately working toward the same goals. Um, so wanted to highlight further the project that we initiated in the spring and summer, because I think there's still opportunity for folks to participate if they haven't already. So it's a summary of the ongoing work to build the 2022 cost baseline, the foundation for determining new and additional costs. Surveys and interviews led by our consultants are helping us to develop the cost models for both collection and MRFs. Um, we're at the stage now of pressure testing these models with industry input and encourage jurisdictions and service providers who haven't participated to do so, to reach out and, if able, please uh, request participation. Ultimately means the more data or the more input that we get, the more accurate the models will be. So this webinar is the first in the three web part series. So on October 16th is the webinar on the reimbursement cost collection analysis, and then October 21st is on the reimbursement MRF cost analysis. So just a quick wrap up. I want to emphasize again that this is a work in progress. The program plan will ultimately define a full process, but right now our focus is on transparency and collaboration as much as possible, ensuring your perspectives help shape the methodology. Um, folks are free to reach out to me at any time, or any of the other team members if you have any questions. We're looking to participate in any of the discussions that we're looking to develop. But just thank you for your time today and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Dave. And with that, we are going to jump into the Q&A portion. And so for the CAA team, I have our first question. How do we get the companies to identify the ROI on changing packaging, especially when packaging alternatives are more expensive?
I think Igor actually might be answering that, or might have just answered that in text. I don't
Okay.
know if
Yes,
maybe.
I have answered that just now, so
Okay.
it's done.
Okay, perfect. Then, Emily, do you want to speak about funding source reduction pilots? Is that something you can?
Yeah, for sure. So the question was, can this also fund source reduction pilots? So not the reimbursement mechanism that was presented today. That's very specifically like in statute, we reimburse for net new costs, that were described today. But separate to this effort, CAA is very much looking at all sorts of different ways that we can help producers achieve their source reduction goals, like what you may remember from that slide is 25% by 2032. They also have reuse and refill goals that we have to meet. So we will be allocating resources towards those efforts, but that's not through the reimbursement mechanism. That's through our just general, bigger picture efforts towards meeting the targets with producers. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Emily. For rural areas without curbside recycling options and limited recycling infrastructure, how will your MRF and collection models incorporate those limitations when self-haul drop-off and community collection are the most common options for diversion?
Yeah, certainly that's, there's a number of criteria that we're looking to include in the development of the model, related to, the different areas and densities and zones. In California, we recognize that costs are different across different jurisdiction. So we're hoping to the model to incorporate those differences in the development of the model and the outputs themselves. Igor, Susan, is there more that you want to add specific to rural communities and how they're being considered?
Yeah, we're working on that with our consultants to do an analysis of currently what's available in the rural communities. We see that's an area that likely has some gaps that need to be filled, and looking at the cost to do that, and then how we can incrementally work with those with communities to help fill those gaps, to make sure that there's equity of service, whether it's more types of materials, location of materials, to be able to move that material then to the end markets and make it convenient to those customers.
Thank you, Susan. There's seemingly a follow-up. My jurisdiction's recycling hauler processor is currently doing a MRF upgrade. What kind of documentation should we save now to get reimbursed for this later?
It's a great question. Those are the kind of things that we'll be looking back for that baseline cost for January 1st, 2023, looking at what changes then are made and for new and additional, that cost element in addition varied from the base year so that we can reimburse costs that are spent that further SB 54 goals. So, and talking to MRFs, my comment is save your receipts, make sure that you're keeping track of looking at your baseline cost of what you started with, as well as the investments that you're making, and then also looking at what that's impacting in terms of materials, volumes, that sort of thing, so that it can be a clean, efficient process in terms of reimbursing you for those net and new additional costs that you're investing in that facility, that your MRF is investing in its facility.
Thank you. Do communities or service providers need to enter into agreements with CAA? There's been an issue apparently in British Columbia, and so hoping one of you can address that.
Yeah, that's the idea, is that for any funding or reimbursement that we provide, that there is an agreement in place with that entity. Obviously, it would be a mutually agreed to contract between us and them, with terms clearly laid out before any agreement or is signed and executed.
Yeah, and I think that just to follow up with that question from Ruth, is we're doing something really different than what they were doing in British Columbia. So I think that while I don't want to say that there's no concerns, I'm sure there will be concerns in many arenas. Like I think that what they were doing setting up depots is not what we're doing in California. And so, but what we would like to find through this consultation process is where are those concerns, like with the kinds of things that you've heard today that we may be reimbursing, like where did those red flags come up for you? It won't be the same as British Columbia, but we may have our new problems here in California. So the more that we can get everybody's input on where we can see those coming before they happen, that would be really, really helpful.
Will the data and methodologies CAA uses for calculating reimbursement basis be made publicly available?
Igor, Susan?
I think so there will be an expectation of propriety for information from facilities as we receive them. The way we're going about doing it is looking if it's a actual cost assessment, and we've used that information. The information that will be public will be one, there's been an application for funding for a specific project. And then at the end, the funding, and again, as David said, this is all in progress. What will be made public will be the amount that is actually funded. And I think that's really important to distinguish between the breakdown of the costs and how it is allocated, but it's necessary for different players to know what the reimbursement is, to ensure that there's no passing along of cost to through franchises or to cities, that all stays separate, and that it's a line item specific to that net new and additional cost for that material.
Thank you, Susan. Colorado and Oregon have already released their EPR program plan, which includes a rate sheet cost of the impacted materials. Has California released its program plan with rate sheet cost? And if not, do you know when it's expected to be released?
Well,
I'm
our
not
program
clear.
plan. Yeah, our
Is it, Emily?
program plan will be submitted to the SB54 Advisory Board and by extension Cal Recycle on June 15th. We do not have rates yet. That's quite a ways down the road. And the rates are for, to be clear, those are for the rates that the producers will be paying based on their packaging. The producers are going to pay what's called early fees. And that's sort of the fees that they pay before the program is actually fully up and running. But those are not representative of their final fees. What the actual fees is, the producer portal is open right now. So producers are actually reporting on their 2023 data, which is helping us set the baseline. We're expecting the deadline, that's open now. The deadline's November 15th. Once we have that, then the fee setting team can kind of work on their methodology. That'll give us some sense of the volume of all the different materials. But right now, we're still in the information gathering stage and quite a ways from setting those actual fees. Oregon and Colorado, Oregon's up and running live, and Colorado's quite a bit ahead of California as well, time-wise. So that's where we're at on that timeline.
Thank you, Emily. There's a question, when will cities and counties gain access to the CAA service portal to be able to submit a reimbursement request?
So we're hoping we're still in the development stage of the portal. We're hoping to initiate a request for information or expressions of interest through the portal early in the new year. Don't have a date for you folks just yet. Obviously, like I mentioned, we don't have a final regulation. Program plan isn't expected to be submitted until June, but we're hoping to collect as much information as possible about what projects we may see as part of the funding application process so that we can, if there's information that's missing that we think will be critical to inform the funding applicability and level and so forth, we want to give you folks that information as much as possible so that you can go out and generate it or collect it or provide it so that when we're ready to provide funding, then it's a more streamlined process. It's going to be a very tight turnaround for us from submission of the program plan to when our obligations kick in. So if there are changes and improvements to the system or enhancements that are required to support our abilities to meet those requirements, we would invariably want to support those as soon as possible. Susan, Igor, if there's anything else you want to add, or Emily?
If I could, I'd like to add an advertisement for that because I think once the portal's available, it would be great for folks to go in and look at it and see kind of what it looks like, get familiar with it, and also submit if you have applications that you will be submitting. What that will also do, in addition to everything that Dave just said, is help us understand, CAA understand what the requirements are going to be, what the expectations are going to be, and what the needs are. Hoping to get that available to folks early in 2026. Although nothing can be funded until the program starts in 2027, having that information will, again, facilitate the easier funding process, as well as having a good sense of really what the expectations are for funding in 2027.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing to that as well. While we don't have a set date yet that the portal will open for applications, before we have an official open portal where you can log in and do what you need to do, what we'll have in CA on their California team is human beings. Right, so we are currently hiring and bringing on board a recycling operations team whose primary job is going to be to work with jurisdictions, with MRFs, with haulers to figure out what these applications look like, what the possibilities are. And so even if we don't have something where you can log in and click and submit, we'll have people very soon just coming on board in the next few weeks. We've got started where you can talk to someone at CAA and talk through what you're thinking and get questions answered and that kind of thing. So we're really trying to do that to bring that team on now so that people will be prepared to fill out these applications when the portal does open. So more on that once we have people, but that's happening soon.
Thank you all. And just as a reminder to everyone, we are going to try to get through as many questions as possible, but we have hundreds of participants joining us today, and we have many dozens and dozens of questions. So please be patient. Um, how can a recycling service provider gain access and participate in review of the cost reimbursement model that is being developed?
Oh, that is an excellent question. We're so glad you asked it. We would welcome, we have a consultant team that is working on that. However, to make it easy, we can probably provide, maybe even in the follow-up, if you give us your information, we can provide a email address to try to make that easy for you. And we would
Yeah,
encourage as well to please use that email address and reach out, and we'll work with you to engage you on that effort. Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just gonna, if folks don't have our emails, maybe Francis, we can figure out a way to get it to them. And like Emily mentioned, some of us are here already that can answer some of your questions, and we'll have more people coming on board for you even further.
Thank you all. Is CAA developing any template language for an agreement that local jurisdictions may need to take to City Council for approval to accept reimbursed funds?
I think that's a very good important piece of feedback. I think we may have developed some of this. Francis, Vayu, I maybe call on you for our experience in other jurisdictions. Certainly, we've developed agreements for reimbursement in Oregon, um, other jurisdictions, and in terms of template and guidelines, are you able to speak to as to what those look like?
As far as application process and for funding and things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's at this point in California, that remains to be developed. We are considering a model similar to what's being used in Oregon at this point, which is an application is made for funding, whether it's for capital or operating costs, depending on the different funding streams that will become available. And again, those are under development at this point. Those will be reviewed. They are managed usually with what we call a primary funding agreement, which is just a template agreement that just has the regular terms and conditions that you would normally see in a contract. And then with that is an addendum that supplements the primary funding agreement, and the addendum is very specific to what was applied for funding. So, and again, it's difficult to determine here because we haven't established exactly all our funding streams, but you can expect to say an addendum for education and outreach. There could be an addendum for capital funding and immature recovery facility. There could be an addendum for capital for adding new materials in your collection system. You may even have a reuse program or something like that. So there'd be a different addendum for each different stream of funding available that would apply that. So, and none of those documents are overly onerous. I think the primary funding agreement is like 10 pages or something like that. The addendum may vary depending on the size of the projects. Obviously, if you're just calling us and you need an optical and it's fairly straightforward, it's a relatively simple addendum. But if you're calling us to build a new material recovery facility that's $30 million with a bunch of equipment over a certain lifespan or whatever, then it'll be the requirements for that would be a bit longer, I guess. And that addendum will now align when we provide funding, how much funding we provide, and what the requirements are to go along with that, like any reporting that we need to support the funding agreement. I hope that helps.
And what I was hearing in that question as well is that you may need to give your city or your legal heads up on what this agreement looks like before you go too far down that road. So I think that what we can also take back here is once we have that agreement, which is, as Francis said, is not done yet, that's something we may be able to post or make available. You have to talk to our lawyers on how all this works, but to the extent that we can make that available so that you're aware of what the terms are before you go through the whole application process, it sounds like that might be helpful. So we'll take that back and see what we can do there.
Right, next question. If public education costs are reimbursed on a dollar per household basis, will educational projects that require additional funds on top of that programmatic funding be eligible for the application-based project funding?
Yeah, I mean, again, wait for the guidelines, but I would say yes. If a public education initiative requires funding beyond the standard per household allocation or per capita allocation, there's no reason why it can't be submitted under the application-based project funding stream. I think this allows jurisdictions or service providers to pursue additional reimbursement, additional initiatives for larger or innovative projects that ultimately advance SB 54 goals.
Thank you, Dave. Is CAA planning on doing a cost effectiveness analysis to prioritize which projects are funded?
I'll get Susan Igor to weigh in, but as part of the review process, we are going to have a set of criteria that I mentioned to evaluate the application against. And um, it's a good question. I don't know if we've landed on anything specific, Susan, but certainly um, if the project um, is targeting a priority material, for example, a material that we know, and I mentioned one, film and flexibles. There are also others, PT thermoforms, small format items, cartons, poly-coated materials that we know are a little bit of a challenge to collect or recycle at the end of the day, where end market may be limited. Certainly those projects, either A, we may be pursuing them on our own, but if they come through us, all the better. They may be greater weight, but I don't think we've landed on anything specific yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there is a prioritization process that is layered into the evaluation criteria process as well. And it's not a one size fits all. For example, we may have places that the tonnage improvement may not be high, but it's a community that really needs some help with public education. And that needs to be a place where we know there needs to be funding. So going through it, basically the idea is to determine whether a project is a covered cost. And once it's determined to be a covered cost, that project will, and included in that evaluation will be, is everybody ready? Are the jurisdictions and the service providers, are they ready to move forward with the project? So that might influence whether something gets funded in year 1 or year 2. And once the evaluation is made and the project is determined to be a covered cost, likely is, any of those covered costs will be covered as part of the funding approval process.
And we are just about out of time here. So thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and participation. The next step is to provide your feedback. Your feedback is very important in developing a robust and effective plan for achieving California's ambitious recycling and packaging waste reduction goals. Please complete the questionnaire using the link provided in the chat. You will also find a link to the questionnaire in an email following this webinar, or you can access the questionnaire by using the QR code on your screen. To do that, simply open the camera app on your smartphone or tablet, point your camera at the QR code on the screen, and then tap the link that pops up. That will take you directly to the questionnaire. Please submit your response by 11:59 p.m. Pacific Time on November 14th. We look forward to receiving your input. You can stay up to date by following us on social media, visiting our website, or emailing us at info@circularaction.org. And that next slide, Dave has all of that information there. So please reach out to us, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. Great questions. Already lots of food for thought here. Please keep them coming.
Thank you.